Hello everybody, and welcome to Module 7, where we're going to be kicking off some simple game design. To get us started in the right headspace, I'm going to go ahead and ask and answer the 6 W's about games in general. To begin with, who plays games? Everyone. And when and where do we do them? Whenever possible. This includes simple puzzle games like crosswords and sudokus, and more casual games like avoiding cracks on the street or playing the floor is lava on hotel carpet. Why do we do these things? Well, for 2 simple reasons: entertainment and achievement. Everyone has time to spend, and if you can spend that time doing something that gives you happy brain chemicals, then you're more than happy to do so. Therefore, what is a game? Well, it's simply anything that is fun and has some certain goal. Let's take, for instance, the floor is lava. Which tiles can we step on? Where are we trying to go? All of that is defined by the rules of the game which we make up when we decide to start playing. And those rules come with a little asterisk. See, in the real world, rules change. There's 1,000 different home variations of Uno about when you can play cards and how many cards you have to draw, and some games, like Dungeons & Dragons, encourage the players to change the rules as they play the game so that they can have more fun. Even games with hard set rules like chess inspire thousands of variations just so that people can play the game in different ways. On the other hand, video games have laws. Players aren't allowed to change the rules of the game once they start playing. Every mechanic and action that the players are allowed to take is predetermined by us, the designers, before it ever goes into their hands. In this example, we have all of Kirby's default abilities, but the players will never discover a new Kirby ability. They'll only be able to get the abilities that are already pre-programmed into the game. This becomes an important thing to keep in mind when we start designing our levels, because if we give the players an obstacle, we need to be aware of the tools they can use to cross it or avoid it entirely. Now that we've started talking about game design, let's ask the big question. How do we play video games? What do I mean by this? Well, let's start with what button is jump. Go ahead, take a moment, come up with an answer, but I'm willing to bet that 90% of people would answer this question with one of 4 options: the left mouse button, the spacebar, or the A or X buttons on a controller. And the reason for that is bias. If you've ever played a game that has a jump option, or if you've ever heard of a game that has a jump button, you probably can make an educated guess or assumption about which button should be jump. And part of that reason is because most controllers are designed so that motion is controlled with the left hand, while action is controlled with the right. Of course, there are exceptions, but again, this is just a standardized bias. Bias goes a little bit deeper than that, of course. If we look inside of games themselves, let's talk about color theory for a second. Interactable objects are usually yellow, red usually pertains to some sort of health potion, and blue generally gives you some sort of shield or block effect. Of course, there are, again, always exceptions. For instance, green is just as likely to be some sort of healing effect or some sort of poison effect. So the reason I bring up how do we play games is so that you can go ahead and preemptively do some research on bias. Go play some games, figure out some common trends, similarities, differences, figure out what's intuitive, what's strange about certain games, and then use that to create guidelines that'll help you inform your game design. Sorry about that little bait and switch, but this level of research is really our step 0 before we get into how we plan video games. Now, the way I like to plan my video games is I like to come up with a goal first. Maybe it's defeat an enemy or reach a checkpoint, those sorts of things. Once that's set in stone, I create gameplay to go along with it. Mechanics and tools for the player to use, attached to intuitive controls, and obstacles for them to defeat with creative solutions. Then, once I've got all of that done, I'll come up with a narrative to wrap the whole game up in a pretty little story. It's important to note that you can take those steps and use them in the opposite way, where you come up with the story first, or the mechanics first, and then come up with the goals and checkpoints later. But let's take this mechanics first approach and come up with an example. So here's our little goal flag, and we've got our player character. We need to reach the flag, so we'll start by giving the character the ability to move, WASD, and the spacebar to jump. But this is a very simple level, so let's go ahead and throw in an obstacle. Maybe the flag is too high to jump to. Let's come up with a creative solution to that. We know from our bias research that interactable objects are yellow, so we'll add in a rope that they can climb, and we'll add in a new mechanic so that they can climb by holding shift with the W and S keys. Now let's give them a little bit more. Let's throw in some narrative elements. maybe we'll add in fall damage and make the rope go way higher than it needs to. And then if the player lets go of the rope while they're too high, they'll take some damage. But we'll also give them a warning sign ahead of time so that they know that that's a problem. Then let's go ahead and add some more narrative. Let's give them a reason to go all the way up there. Let's go ahead and change our little hill into maybe a cliffside, put the flag up there, but then add some other platforms that the character can reach. And then to really get them excited about going up there, we'll throw in some collectibles that they can get. And just like that, I've created a very simple platformer with a lot of options that the player can take. Once I've reached this point with a simple level design, I'll go ahead and do a little bit more research. I'm going to go and look for other games with climbing mechanics, other collectible games, see how they handle things, maybe get some aesthetic inspiration, some mechanics inspiration, and I'll go ahead and add those to my game. So, this is my refined version, where I now have additional ropes, additional puzzles, and interactable. You can see that I now have this interact with E button, where I need to lower this rope to reach the finish, because I've moved it away from the first rope. I've moved the collectibles to a spot where if you want to get them, you have to double back on yourself, jump from rope to rope or platform to platform to reach them. Once I've done this, I can start visualizing the path that my player is going to take to reach the finish line. So here's that path. I expect them to go up, climb the ropes, cross this rope, lower the bundle, and reach the finish line. In addition to that player path, I can imagine the additional paths that the player might take to collect those collectibles, which would cause them to double back on the initial player flow. And then on top of that, I can also begin to realize shortcuts, where maybe I didn't move the finish line far enough, and they can take this shortcut jump and skip half the level to reach the finish line. Now, it's important to understand that you probably don't find a shortcut like this during this stage of level design, because we don't really know how high the player jumps or how much damage they take from falling. But it's important to realize that players will try to take the fastest path towards a goal that they can, and it's up to us as game designers to decide whether we want to remove those with a barrier or by distancing the platforms, or if we leave it in as an Easter egg for some of the more adventurous players. Now, you've also been given a little bit of reading to do this module, specifically this pre-production tab, which goes into how you might want to start designing a game. I heavily encourage you to check out the Level Design Book's other tabs, including the Layout tab, which goes into more detail on designing rooms or cities, as well as the Player Flow tab, which goes into directing players to go through certain paths, and then finally, down here at the very bottom, this How to Study a Level tab, which goes into more detail about if you're playing through games, how you might want to read them and interpret player behavior. Now, for your Module 7 homework, you're going to be doing that bias and mood board research that I talked about, and then creating a simple level design the same way I did in my example. Then you're going to write a simple description with your mechanics and obstacles and how you want the player to move through your level, and then you're going to upload that to the discussion post. Now, Module 7 marks the start of Project 2, where you're going to be looking at each other's ideas, separating up into groups, and then going ahead and developing one of those ideas into a formal game design document, which we'll be covering in Week 9. With that said, I would also encourage you to maybe double check Module 9, read through Project 2, just so that you have some idea of where this project is going to be going over the next couple weeks. Alright, that's it for me this week. Best of luck designing your simple levels.